right, welcome back, everybody, to Open Line. I'm Rhori Johnston with you here on News Channel 5 Plus on a Thursday night. Thanks again. We're talking about 2022 Tennessee gun legislation. It's up on the Hill right now. Different bills that are moving through the legislature. Our guest is Jessie McKinney. She's a volunteer with Moms Demand Action, the Tennessee chapter. And real quick, Jessie, I just want to let people know I've got a little background info. As you mentioned, this is a grassroots movement of Americans fighting for public safety measures that can protect people from gun violence. Again, not taking guns away necessarily, but we're going to hear from folks tonight. We passed stronger gun laws and work to close the loopholes that jeopardize the safety of our families. Founded by Shannon Watts, a mom who, interestingly, after the Sandy Hook tragedy, she wasn't really involved in it, but just decided I've got to do something, and started, I think, a Facebook group, and then it went on from there. I'm trying to find the group. What is the larger group that's under the umbrella group? Can you tell me?
Yeah, so we're part of Every Town for Gun Safety.
That's it. Thank
Moms
you.
Demand Action is part of it, and there's also Mayors Against Illegal Guns.
Sure.
And then there's also a survivor network that's particularly works with gun violence survivors.
So all around the country. Real quick, before we dive into some of the legislation that I talked about, I know there is, one of them is what we just mentioned. It's called an Extreme Risk Protection Order law, or a red flag law. You know, a lot of people talk about this in the days following when we have some sort of a tragedy, where obviously, especially mass shooting events, typically we're dealing obviously not only with some high-powered firearms, but in the hands of someone who has some serious mental and emotional issues that have not been addressed. And you know, we always say, where were the red flags? Why didn't this person, or, you know, didn't someone see this, or someone posted on social media? So this bill basically would allow a family member or law enforcement to get the court and present this and say that this person should not have a gun. And then there is another one that expands who can have guns, and it kind of has to do with enhanced safety and law enforcement. We'll get into that, but I do have a caller, and I want to get right to line one and welcome Joe. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
Hey, how are you, sir?
I would like to say the Constitution has been amended 27 times.
Yes, it has.
And why can't we make an amendment to the, to the gun law to where it would be somewhat like in England, where before you can have a gun, the police have to know where you're keeping that gun, for instance.
Right.
And they can go in at any time and see if you've got your guns where you said you're going to keep your guns.
Right.
And people would still have the right to have a gun. In fact, I would love to see a strong militia to where almost everybody would volunteer to go learn how to handle a gun and how to shoot, and that type of thing, but just not every rogue individual could have a gun and walk in a classroom and just start killing people, or out on the street and just start killing people. Mm-hmm. This is ridiculous.
Joe, thank you very much. I appreciate the call. Yeah, I will say, well, first of all, it sounds like common sense to most people, but obviously to get an amendment to the Constitution passed, that is a long haul, and there's a lot of steps on purpose. So the reality is we are a country of what, 300 million plus people, and it's very difficult. But again, we are talking about common sense. What do you know about some of the legislation, Jessie, right now here in Tennessee?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the Extreme Risk Protection Order legislation first. So I will say that that bill was one that we supported. It did not make it through committee, so it has been killed, for lack of a better word.
And let me just interrupt real quick. When people hear that, they think, oh, it's over. But the way our state legislature works, it might be over for this session. This actual General Assembly. What happens is throughout the summer, lawmakers still work. It's called summer session. And a lot of times these bills that didn't make it, it might be for language, it might be this or that. And you know, the House and the Senate, they have to agree on everything. You know, and that's why it gets sent back and forth. We don't like that until finally they come up with maybe, and if they can't, then they say, hey, we'll move it to summer session. Is that the case here, where maybe they can work on this and then next year it could come back?
You know, I do think that could be the case. And so I'll talk a little bit about what the legislation or what the bill was saying. And extreme risk protection orders are I think they're in 18 or 19 states already. And what they do is, like you said, it allows a family member or a police officer to petition a court when they believe that someone is in danger to themselves or others if they remain with access to their guns. And so I think there's a misperception around ERPO laws or red flag laws that just anyone can say anything about anyone to get their guns removed. And there's really a pretty stringent hurdle that has to be met. The person, it has to be family member or law enforcement. They have to present their evidence to a judge in a court. And then the judge rules whether or not there was enough evidence to do a temporary restriction from that person from their weapon. And then there is an extended period of time, and then that will go back in front of a judge to determine if that moment of crisis has passed, then the individual is allowed access to their guns again. If that moment of crisis is still happening, then the order can be extended. And people do talk about these oftentimes after a mass shooting, because oftentimes we find out there were red flags, there were warning signs, and there was no legal mechanism to remove a gun from an individual that had homicidal tendencies.
Sure.
But what happens more often is actually these are used to reduce gun suicides. Gun suicide is a tragedy in our country. And when someone is struggling with suicidal ideation and feeling like they want to end their life, when they have access to a firearm, when they have a gun in their home, that moment can become a irreversible decision to end their life. Whereas if someone knows that their husband or their mother or a police officer recognizes that there is a situation that is a crisis and this person is in danger to themselves, they can often petition and use the extreme risk protection order to get that person separated for that gun so they can get the mental health that they need.
Do you know if that would include medical professionals as well? Maybe mental health, a therapist, a counselor, even a primary care physician?
You know, I don't think in the bill that was in session this time. It was just immediate family members and law enforcement.
Sure. Okay. And you know, you speak very well on these issues. I want to ask you, as a volunteer, what was the learning curve like to learn, you know, kind of how this, you know, how they make the sausage, really?
You know, it's an interesting question that you asked me that. I was someone who did not understand very much about our state legislature before I entered into this volunteer role. And I started to watch what happened on the Hill and how bills became laws. And I realized that so many things happen without most everyday citizens realizing. And it's not until after the bill is passed and it becomes law, then they say, well, I didn't know about that. That was a horrible idea. Right. And so following what the legislation is doing is definitely a learning curve, but it's something that is a passion of mine. You know, I just am so driven to make our community safer that I follow, especially like I said at the beginning of the session, I'll know what bills are of interest to me, and I track them in that way.
Who's filing what? And you know, I understand it's our job and the media as well to cover as much as we can with the resources we have, and same with print media. But now there are, with these grassroots groups, volunteers, and also there's social media. Do you think that that helps to be able to get the word out about, okay, today here's what happened, next day here's when this is scheduled, there's a public, if you'd like to come to this, and so on?
Exactly. I think that helps a lot, especially for Moms to Bed Action, because we're able to mobilize our volunteers and give them an update using social media. And then, you know, we can let them know that this bill is being heard in this committee tomorrow. Here are the lawmakers. Give them a call. Let them know what you think. And that the ability of social media to really connect people is very important.
What other bills that you know about are of concern? I mentioned the one that would expand where some gun owners can carry. And some of this, surprisingly, not only maybe groups like yours are opposed, but there are some law enforcement groups, including the Fraternal Order of Police, who aren't quite so sure they like what they hear. Tell us about it.
Yes, that's one of the things is that we find that often over the last few years, we're aligned with law enforcement and in the bills that we support and in the bills that we're opposing. So law enforcement and Moms Demand Action oftentimes have mutual interest in keeping communities safe. Right. The one that you're talking about actually made national news because of how ridiculous it was. So I believe the intent was to expand where people with an enhanced carry permit could carry their weapons. Right now, businesses and other private property can restrict guns on their property. They can place the signage, and as citizens with an enhanced carry permit, you're not allowed to bring your gun into certain places with a sign, if the sign is posted. Law enforcement, can bring their weapons in many more places than citizens. And I think the intent was to expand where citizens could carry guns. But the way it was worded really was acting like they were almost de facto law enforcement officers. And so I think it was a very poorly constructed bill. And because of that, it actually has not moved forward. It also got stuck in committee and is not moving on. But it's just an example of one of those bills that it was so ridiculous, it made the national news.
Wow. Do you think the idea around it, though, do you expect to see another form of it maybe next year?
I don't know. I think if the intent, I think the bill sponsor perhaps could reword and maybe create a bill that might get their goal in a more effective way. But I really have problems with that idea that a business owner cannot decide what is allowed in their business. I think we have to think about a private property owner or a business owner, and they should have the right to restrict guns on their property. And I really don't like that idea that a private citizen's rights would trump a business or a private property owners.
All right, with that, we got to take another break, and we will come back to discuss more happenings on the Hill with our guests. Stay with us.